So to start with the news of the day, seeing estimates start to trickle out about the number of active users on 14. Keep in mind when you see a number from one website, go ahead and try to use that same website to look up similar games so that you can have some context for how their method of calculating these very not publicly revealed numbers work. Because I'm seeing some numbers that Final Fantasy is coming in enormous. But when I go look up World of Warcraft on those same websites, World of Warcraft is coming in substantially over what some more industry and specifically Blizzard-informed numbers are coming in at. So you can't have one without the other. So let's keep some context there, and let's get into why Blizzard are cleaning house.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Of course, another day, another Activision Blizzard news story, because Overwatch has actually had its upcoming content plans be changed based on the current Blizzard situation, and World of Warcraft is even getting some additional changes, all because of one man, the actions of which we currently have absolutely zero idea. It is all rather interesting. So what blew the lid in all of this was the Overwatch team making their own statement, and to basically cut the whole statement, to cut a long story short, the character of Jesse McCree, named after Blizzard developer Jesse McCree, is no longer going to be called Jesse McCree, and that's because Jesse McCree was found at the Cosby Suite. Maybe. Here's the deal. We know that Jesse McCree, Louis Barrega, and Jonathan LeCraft are all gone. They've all been terminated from Blizzard Entertainment. Now, it's very strange, or not strange, because I don't think they have... I mean, should we expect them to just go and issue a public statement of what all of these people have done exactly? I mean, I don't really know if that's procedure, but at least we can assume the policies under which these people were terminated, where, of course, the big man himself, Bobby Kotick, said that anybody who engaged in activities that breach their, their sort of code of conduct, those people are going to be terminated, or, appropriate action is going to be taken, but that additionally, people who shielded people, managers who looked the other way, things like that, that those people would also go.
I don't remember
I don't know about Louis Barrega in the context of the call.
I don't remember it being that past tense. I remember Bobby's statement being something more along the lines of people who impeded the investigation moving forward. So his letter was written with a fair amount of space to go back and kind of rewrite that timeline. Just a little bit. So I don't know that they're obligating themselves to be like super strict on that, but it does seem that they have an intent to remove anybody they deem problematic in their eyes, not necessarily problematic in the public's eyes. So there may be people at the end of this process that there is still a public or even in-house group of people that disagree with them getting to remain on, that get to remain on. So I don't know that it's if you have ever one time been associated with anything, you're out. I don't think it's quite that strict.
Cosby Suite, but Jesse McCree is someone who was pictured at the Cosby Suite. Another man pictured at the Cosby Suite, of course, is Corey Stockton, who was wrapped up in that entire thing with Ethan Gatch's reporting on Kotaku, where, it's the Alex Afrasabi personal Facebook, where Corey Stockton says, it's the greatest group chat in the history of mankind, and then the group chat is maybe a bit iffy feeling, a bit iffy feeling, let's just say. Now, the funny thing there is we don't know a single thing about Corey Stockton, other than his Twitter profile doesn't exist anymore. So we have no idea if he is still at the company, but we do know that Barrega, LeCraft, and McCree have all been removed from Blizzard Entertainment, and that the character of McCree in Overwatch is going to be renamed. Now, this ended up being a bit of a tricky situation for the Overwatch team, because they're saying here that they actually had a narrative arc planned for September that was going to be supported with a new story and new game content, and that McCree was a core part of said content. Now, that to me is even interesting because, let's be real, Overwatch 2 should be out already. probably, and I think we all agree that at the very least it should have been out end of 2021. But obviously that game's been taking a far longer time to get out of the oven, which makes you think maybe it's a 2022 ordeal, and then you sort of have to think, well,
it is something they were looking at investing more in the narrative of Overwatch, and it is something absolutely wild that the narrative portion of Overwatch happened to be coming out at the same time that they're wanting to change the narrative. Had this been Overwatch 1, they could have just changed the name and it would have affected some stuff. But at this point, they've started building all these assets. And so naming it after a developer turns out to be a poor plan because you're obligating that character to be tied to anything we ever learn about that person from then forward. And you, of course, hope that all of your developers have been, and always will be absolutely wonderful people. But if that turns out to be anything but true, you're really in a hard spot, especially when the name is this clear. We don't have anything like this in Final Fantasy, really, outside of the drama. Like, there's some writers that it would be a big deal. There's some people that have touched the music that have been some big deal. There's some encounter names that are known. But as far as like in-game assets, like outside of Yoshi P himself being incriminated in something, I don't know that you would have this same impact.
Well, maybe with Overwatch being a bit in maintenance mode for a while, they realized they needed a bit more content to actually carry them through into the new game, and maybe that's why they planned this content that was originally going to come out in September. But no, that is being delayed because they need to remove McCree. Now, rename. Now, renaming McCree is going to have quite an impact on their pipeline, you know? Voice lines, things like that, those are going to have to be redone. So that is going to delay this content. However, they have said that, they're delaying that content because they want the name change for McCree to be a part of that story arc and to actually be there. But there is going to be a new free-for-all map coming out in September instead. And they've said that going forward, in-game characters will no longer be named after real employees, and they'll be a lot more thoughtful and discerning about adding real-world references in future Overwatch content. Now, this also does impact World of Warcraft because of Gisera of what was originally pronounced McCree? It's kind of weird. So this area, which in the modern pronunciation is pronounced McCree, is a place that, you know, the Draenei in World of Warcraft that they come from.
I would think in this case you could just lean further into that, McCree, right? And so, like, get some of that spelling out there. Change the letters out. Also, like, World of Warcraft is not nearly as heavily... Maybe I just missed them, but I don't remember there being as many, like, big voice scenes as you literally have a character in Overwatch. That's kind of a big deal. So I don't know that a reference from a city in Legion is nearly as impactful as McCree in Overwatch.
And that character, Gisera of McCree, which I believe was a character added in the Burning Crusade, that was a reference to Jesse McCree. So now for World of Warcraft, according to the Washington Post have said that a Blizzard spokesperson said that all references to Jesse McCree will be removed. And it also referenced other Fired staff like the Craft and Barriga. So World of Warcraft changes. They'll probably have to update the map and change the name of that zone, which in itself could be a bit tricky if they have the likes of voice acting be tied into that, because McCree is said multiple times in the game. And interestingly, one of the Blizzard employees, who themselves wasn't particularly comfortable with there being an actual employee reference in the game world, she supposedly drove it being pronounced McCree in the voice acting and so forth that happened with the Legion expansion. So it's all very, very interesting stuff. And I would definitely say, yeah, don't have references to your devs be all inside your game. I would go further, actually, and, you know, other than the likes of, say, things like a memorial for Wreckful or a memorial for Haven, which they should absolutely do. I really don't think community members should be referenced in the game either. And I know that could be a controversial...
I think a single quest or something like that as an isolated thing, there's a ton of pop culture references that refer to celebrities. If those celebrities were to ever be put in a distasteful light and there was a quest dedicated to them, this is all surrounding the Cosby suite. And so obviously with everything surrounding Bill Cosby, had there been a quest that made a joke about Bill Cosby and maybe put your character in a sweater and you ran around and did goofy stuff, that would seem very distasteful given information that appeared in court later. And so anytime you make a reference to the real world, it's a risk. And these games make pop culture references and celebrity references all the time, and your devs should be no different. If you want to make a joke that Ian made or J. Allen Brack made or whatever, and have a character in the game say you think you do but you don't, or whatever, just keep it isolated. Don't name a zone. Don't name an NPC that's going to be long lasting. Somebody, like a thrall that's going to stick around for a while. Keep those very separate. Some of the people that have been implicated in this, their NPC was like a Valor vendor or whatever. And so you can just delete that vendor. You could replace the vendor with something called like just Sergeant Valor vendor. Like it could just be any placeholder you want. It doesn't matter. You could just make a name up. And then it's swapped out and it's done. Right? So if you want to have a quest that makes a light of something and jokes, just keep it isolated. And much like the New York Times and all these things keep obituaries for celebrities on staff, you should have some sort of documentation where all these references are. I think Wowhead largely handles it for you, but it should be done in-house, where you know that if something ever happens, you can go search a celebrity or a dev name, and it will tell you every reference that was to that person, even if it doesn't reference that person by name, if it references a quote that they're famous for or whatever, so that you can say, hey, we have 13 references to Tom Cruise across this. Tom Cruise crossed a line publicly to the point that Blizzard would like to do something about it, and Blizzard can go back and say, those are the 13 places we need to scrub. And so I think that's pretty straightforward. Don't name things that need to stay in game. Name things like side quests and all of that can just be replaced, especially if they're things like seasonal events where you've got a timeline where they're not available in game outside of that time window. This is not we're not allowed to have fun because some people suck. Like, we can all have fun and have a good laugh. But if you're going to be a company that is seen as condoning behavior and you're going to be operating on this scale, then you need to set aside the resources, which is something indie devs don't have to do. But part of having all this extra income is you need to set aside the resources to go back and scrub this stuff should it ever become problematic. And with that in mind, you should limit the scope to how big a reference is allowed to be. I think a zone or a main character in a character-based game, that's a problem.
Statement. I actually have friends or people, acquaintances, whatever, who do have World of Warcraft references, and I mean absolutely no shade to them, but frankly, and it's why, if Blizzard was to, I mean, they would never do it because I've probably talked so much, about them, if they were to put a reference to me in the game, my response would be that I really appreciate the thought, but that it is against my wishes, because I never want somebody to log into World of Warcraft to see an NPC and to think, oh, that's someone outside of the game. Oh, that's a reference to that person on Twitter. Oh, that's a reference to that YouTuber. To me, that is awful for game immersion, and it should not be what goes on. And I think here we're seeing another little dimension to that.
I think that depends on your definition of immersion. Bellular is very narrative based, and so he's talking about immersion in the purest sense, that I'm literally in an escapist version of this where I'm experiencing this world, and that this world is totally separate and independent of mine in every way. But for people that are becoming immersed in a community, in a movement, in a game where maybe narrative isn't for them, people can have their entire lives revolve around an MMO and not give a crap about story. And to them, they are logging in and their character does matter, and those other characters do matter. There are people in the real world, that when I meet them in person, like, I think of them by their in-game name and I call them by their in-game name. And so the game has extended to reality every bit as much as reality has extended to the game. And in that case, like, to make reference to that, to make obvious to that is part of immersion. We see it in cosmetic systems. You don't force me to dress the way that they would have dressed by lore. You allow people to run around in goofy hats and all of that. That's immersion breaking, but no, it's not. It's allowing my personality to come through. When you talk about player housing in Final Fantasy and you let people decorate however they want, they don't have to dress in a way that Eorzeans would have actually done. They don't have to operate by the laws of physics. They can have weird combinations of things that wouldn't make sense, because it's still a game. So I think when you're talking about immersion, having pop culture references in quest names or in quest text, having things in the game that kind of laugh at itself and the history of the game, laughing at how poor an event launched or something like that. When you have clear references to previous expansions, but not in a historical context, but in like how it played out, you see those all over long-lasting MMOs all the time. And referencing community members, whether they be on the content creation side or the developer side, or a celebrity, or making tribute to a voice actor, I don't know that those are problematic from my point of view, but that's because I'm not viewing this as like a true-to-form documentary, historical, accurate representation of Azeroth or Eorzea. I'm viewing this as an MMO, and an MMO is an immersive thing where there is a narrative component and the devs are writing the baseline, and then the players are coming in a sandbox state and expanding on that and creating these moments. And some of the most meaningful moments narratively in these games are moments when you think back to, like, when somebody passes away here in the real world and the players make a tribute in game. Those times where the bridge between reality and the game are the strongest are some of the most memorable, impactful, cherished moments in a community. So to say that you can't just openly document those, I think, is taking it a little too literally for me.
That where if you can't really trust some of those individuals to act in a decent manner, you end up in a situation like this. Now, what is interesting, if I hop over to the tweets of Mr. Ian Bates, who I think many of us will remember as the famous red shirt guy of BlizzCon fame, he says, the McCree situation has the strangest backstory to it. McCree started off as a piece of concept art for a cancelled StarCraft MMO that was replaced by Titan and then Overwatch. They liked the characters so much they wanted to keep the design but couldn't think of a name. While brainstorming what would be the best cowboy name, an employee pointed out that Jesse McCree sounded like an awesome name for a cowboy, and everyone agreed, and they got the actual Jesse McCree to sign over the rights for his name. And as he says, so much hassle could have been avoided if they were able to think of a name before the employee suggested Jesse McCree. In fairness to that employee, Jesse McCree totally is a great cowboy name, but, obviously it's not really the way to do things.
No, I think the moment you realized that you were naming a mainline character after somebody that you needed to have them sign the rights over, you were putting too much trust in someone else's hands, into things you can't control. And as a corporation that has been very well aware of what the word control means, it feels weird that they would sign off on something that large. Having real-world references should stop at references. When they become so big that it's going to become a character of its own with its own lore and its own merch and all of that, you've gone past. And so you need to, at that point, find another name.
And now there is a quote provided to the gaming outlet Kotaku. We will be reviewing the real-world references currently used in our games and making decisions based on how they represent core values in our games. As I said earlier, I think memorials, awesome, very good. Robin Williams, Wreckful, that's great stuff. I would just say, if you've got a bunch of community members, a bunch of Blizzard employees, even just from a creative perspective,
even memorials can be controversial. You look at the documentary that came out after Michael Jackson passed. Like, there can be controversy around a name. So like, I don't know that memorials frees you from something. I don't know that, and in my mind, if consent is part of it, I don't know that naming a character after somebody, when he said, if they did this, I would want to reach out and say, please don't do that. Well, if he hadn't made that statement publicly just now, what if Bellular had passed and then we named a character after Bellular out of tribute? You can be doing this against their wishes. So if you want to bring respect into this, I don't know that that's a better plan.
Perspective, I am against those being in the game because it's too noticeable. I mean, even if I go and, like, I love Lord of the Rings, like, some of my favorite movies ever, by far, absolutely. But there is that weird little thing whenever I see the director cameo, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's Peter Jackson, awesome, he made the movie, he's a really cool dude, I like him. And suddenly, I've been taken a little bit out of Middle-earth. Now, it's pretty okay in Lord of the Rings because it's tiny little cameos, and really you'll only recognize that if you go and you look up trivia. But there are times within some games where it's very obviously a staff reference, and I just think that's an immersion breaking thing, and it would go against sort of design philosophies that I would agree with, I'd say. Now, what's funny about the new map, the map that they're putting in for free-for-all, Malvento, was on the PTR, and it was seemingly intended to be released in August following the usual PTR cycles, but it disappeared entirely and silently. Now it's resurfaced, replacing the release of narrative content. There's maybe some thought here, is it a conspiracy? Did they know they would have to delay content and they did this with this map? Who knows? I mean, I'm sure for the Overwatch players, they're just happy that they know more content's coming.
No. Blizzard is not in a position that they can be intentionally holding back content. They are not in a position where they have so much overwhelming content coming out, and the players are just so happy with all of that content that they're like, yeah, let's keep some back for a rainy day. No, there is no way. People who are theorizing that Blizzard is holding 9.2 to compete with 6.1 because they want, 6.0 to be unanswered? Like, no, they are not holding back content at this point.
And there's a map coming soon. Now, there's one final aspect before we have a chat. That is the stuff from Jessica Gonzalez, who tweeted this on behalf of an anonymous employee. Anyhow, long story short, as we talked, they told me how just 5-ish days ago, there was a group of Blizzard employees they were serving that were loudly talking about how stupid the walkout was and how much nonsense all this is. Just a total disregard for our concerns and the stories of those who have been hurt by all of this. Like, I know Sea Level is trying to sweep this under the rug and treat us like children who just don't understand the world, but to hear that, at least some of our co-workers on campus right now are doing the same and willing to be so loud about it in public is just depressing. I'm angry and disappointed, and I don't know what to do about it. I mean, yeah, that's a situation where you're going to have a varied set of perspectives, and that will range from people who are very outraged at what's going on to people who, realistically, are going to say to themselves, it was a bunch of nerds with a bunch of money, boys will be boys. Now, we can all disagree with that statement, sure, but it just does go to show that, at least from this little anecdotal report, that, this is a screenshot of something that a Blizzard employee has tweeted, so, it's not going to say it's the best sourced thing in the universe, and that this is emblematic of a large issue at Blizzard Entertainment, but, certainly this is not going to be a nice thing for Blizzard employees to see. But at the very least, even if they're not happy at what Activision Blizzard corporate leadership is doing, at least Ybarra and O'Neill joined in that walkout, seemed to show some understanding and solidarity, and seemed to be making steps. And I've heard some good vibes about those people. So that's where we're at.
It's an interesting one because I've seen so many people complain about how this doesn't matter, how this doesn't mean anything, that they're changing the name. But then I saw one Blizzard employee, or I think it was a Blizzard employee anyway, say that not all good things that happen in the wake of controversy are marketing conspiracies.
Mm-hmm.
It depends. If there is a cohesive plan to fix it, it's weird if they don't change the character's name. It does need to be involved as a finishing touch, right? As you're cleaning house, it's the last thing that goes out. But if you're thinking that by changing the name, you don't need to do any of the harder things, making personnel changes, making things that affect people in the real world immediately, going back and doing any corrective action with people who have been affected in the past, the name is it's a reference to what has happened, but it is not the driving force. The character name is not the driving force. The person behind the character name is the driving force. And so, if, for example, they had, not fired some of these people, but then removed their in-game references, that would be a problem. If, on the other hand, they fire them, they bring in new people, they create, a new workflow, and all we hear is that everybody's happy there, everybody's being treated with respect, the content by its very extension gets a lot better, they're releasing more content, all existing references stop, and then we just move into new references moving forward. There's a version of that where the majority of the population might tolerate or even be okay with, or even not even notice what's wrong with that version of reality, even though it leaves past references in old expansions. So if they think this is a core foundational tenet to a 5-part plan, and this is an equal one of those 5 parts, that's a problem. This can't be the thing that does the heavy lifting. This is something public, and it's something that shows action now. So I think it has value. I just don't think it can be the driving force. I think the things that affect real people in the real world in real time are substantially more important than names and past in-game references, for me personally.
Where it seems to be that this was an initiative, kind of like how it was initially brought to light by those the casters for the Overwatch League, referring to him as Cowboy instead of McCree that weekend as soon as the allegations came out. So it seems like it was a kind of mixed community and developer push, that not necessarily is an edict from on high to do this because it'll look good for everyone, but it appears to be a lot of the Overwatch team were like, okay, we really don't feel happy with this, especially because a lot of those developers at the Overwatch team wouldn't actually really have had much to do with Jesse McCree, because Jesse McCree has worked on Diablo. I mean, clearly because of the references in World of Warcraft, there's at least some intercommunication. But if you're someone new to Overwatch who is, maybe you're just from Toys for Bob and you're on Overwatch, or maybe you've just never had an interaction with McCree because he's in a different part of the building, you're just it's not going to be this is the close Blizzard friend McCree. It's going to be, this is just
it's a huge company. It's possible there are people that work on Overwatch that don't really know much about Jesse McCree in person.
Name that evokes a bit of in me.
Yeah.
So why not? Can we get rid of this, please? And maybe the top are going, but it's McCree's. Oh, okay, whatever.
Yeah. So what's pointed out here by Annabelle, who is not a Blizzard employee but is a writer for Blizzard Watch, which is a fan site for for the likes of World of Warcraft, who said, for the people who are just kind of saying, it doesn't matter what. She's saying it means that for the people who actually worked in the game and maybe got harassed by him, they don't have to constantly hear his name. Now, I don't know if she knows things that we don't know. As far as I'm aware, we're not aware of specific allegations against Jesse McCree. But if there is a situation where it's widely known within the building that he was doing shady stuff, I mean, do you want your devs to be kind of working on a character that's his namesake all the time on that? At the very least, it sends a message that they're not particularly cool with the things that he did. Now, I will definitely say I give both sides credit here, of course, because I think you can totally see why they would want to remove the game. I think you can also totally see people's criticisms of this is just a token gesture. What does this actually mean if the top corporate people are still being a pack of dickheads, and the forced arbitration clauses are still going on and all of that? And I totally do agree with those people as well. I actually think that it's possible to agree with both sides here. It's not the biggest gesture in the universe, but you can see why they would do it and why some people would appreciate that, even if you don't. And absolutely, I think we all agree, doesn't take away from the actual heart of the issue, which still is an issue.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think is important about the Blizzard employee saying it's not a marketing conspiracy. It's the action of the developers internally. because you look at Blizzard as a company, like, I mean, even looking at Activision Blizzard and then looking at Blizzard, there's a very diverse set of what they actually are responsible for.
And that's where you start to have the argument back and forth, because I think both sides can agree it's relatively small among the list of gestures that people are calling for. And so on one hand, you can argue it's so small, why should we do it when we can dedicate resources to a bigger gesture, when we can dedicate resources to the other thing, right? We're dedicating time and resources and management oversight in all these changes. Is this really where you want us to put our energy when we could put it into things that are more impactful in a more immediate way? The other way is, if it's not that big of a deal, why don't you just do it? It makes a difference to me. Who cares if it matters to you? I don't want to see names associated with this. I don't want to be reminded of names. And so you see that counterpoint saying, well, if it's not that big of a deal, why not just do it? So it is hard. It's hard to see which way to go there. And that's really their call. I think if you are going to make changes like this, it has to be part of a much more cohesive, large-scale set of changes. Because on its own, my concern would be that by making changes like this, they think they've covered a lot more ground than they have with people. Well, we changed that character's name. Okay, what else did you do? Well, I mean, we changed the character's name. And so, like, I would be concerned that they're thinking it scored a lot more points than it did. Especially for Blizzard fans who maybe didn't play in Legion and aren't Overwatch fans, which still leaves a huge portion of Blizzard property where this to them didn't make that much ground up.
So you look at Blizzard and then you look at the teams, and obviously the Overwatch team, you know, especially like realistically, the Overwatch team is going to have nothing to do with how that like works. Like, there's nothing they could have reasonably done, assuming that they are like largely physically separate in their own offices. They're not going to have known anything about whatever someone in the Diablo or Warcraft team has done and act on it, unless there's like interdepartmental communications on that front. Largely, they're different teams with different responsibilities, and this team is doing what they can to feel better. It's not necessarily, this isn't an act of Blizzard. This is the act of the Overwatch team. And it's like been able to logic.
Keep in mind that communication at Blizzard interdepartmental has been one of the things that the community has alleged isn't going on. That people have been very frustrated that it seems like different departments, even on the same game, aren't always communicating well. So the idea that they're getting time to keep up on the reputation of members of different teams across a company this large, it is very, very likely that there are people that work on Overwatch or work around Overwatch that don't really have any and never have had any direct interaction with Jesse McCree himself.
Logically separate those in your head is where you can see, well, this is a good thing, but it's not enough. But they couldn't have done anything, so it's the best they could do.
Yeah.
It's up to Blizzard leadership to do the rest.
Even for like a quick thing on on the leadership side, like, okay, so at least from what I've noticed, when it comes to the art side of things, generally it is a lot more of a gender mix than it is in, say, the pure programming side.
Yeah.
Right? So there's going to be a bunch of animators, modelers, riggers, etc., who are probably women who are new enough to the industry, going in there. And let's just say it is the case that Jesse McCree went to the Cosby Suite, maybe did some groping, maybe some bad things happen, and it's broadly known within Blizzard from a leadership perspective, and everybody knows that it's, this character is the namesake of this guy and he did those things. Do you think the staff are going to be doing their best work and are going to be the most fired up to do cool stuff about the character McCree, when in the back of their head they always know that that's what was up with McCree?
Yeah.
There's even a sort of funny thing I noticed here. So, WoW Tales, if we actually did, if we were able to launch WoW Tales and, because WoW Tales was okay, totally okay, legally speaking. It was in a good position from the perspective of Blizzard's official add-on policy, but the lawyers kind of came in with some additional shit, which is a pity because, frankly, I do think that WoW Tales kind of knocked the socks out of some of the stuff they were doing, like officially Blizzard, but, of course, Marshall McCree. We voice-acted Marshall McCree, and we voice-acted lines that, because we rewrote the script of Elwyn Forest pretty much completely, which is quite funny, because, if we had done that, then we too would have got a little bit of a taste of that, having to go in, change up those voice lines. But for other characters, yeah, there's the city of McCree. There's Jessariah McCree, there's Jessup McCree, there's Marshall McCree, there's Jenny McCree, there's Jessara of McCarry, and then for Jonathan LeCraft, there's Crafticus Mindbender, Torturer LeCraft, Jonathan Lee Craft, and Senior Scrivener Barriga. Probably you're all going to be changed.
Yep, I mean, I think the quote that Kotaku got from the Blizzard spokesman saying that they're going to revisit all of that makes sense to me, because obviously the original one that the Washington Post got was the Overwatch team saying we're going to like think hard about what we do in future in the Overwatch team, but Kotaku's like, we're going to review all the real world references across Blizzard. So I imagine there'll be a lot of those gone.
I mean, all of the real world references would be an enormous task. There is very rarely a quest that does not have a title based on a pop culture reference or some common turn of phrase manipulated. And this is true in Final Fantasy as well. So when we look at this, keep in mind that this affects Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy XIV has a number of references where it starts a phrase or ends a phrase, or it clearly makes a turn of phrase that is close to a common thing we say or a reference to an event. And the localization teams are responsible for that. So that is happening globally in each language they are going in. And so a quest name here in English may be very different than that quest name in another part of the world that's in another language, because the goal is to make a reference. The goal is to get a smile out of you. And so the real world reference, the question is, if they're going back and they're saying, we're going to make a conscious effort to go back and review all real world references, does that start to affect celebrities that have been referenced, events that have been referenced? Like, where does that stop? Does it just stop at cleaning house of devs? Because what happens if it comes out? I mean, when you look back at historical figures here in the US, O.J. Simpson was a football player. That's what he was known for. Not now. And so if you had a reference in your game to O.J. Simpson and then the trial happened, do you have to go back and change that reference? If you had a reference, it's taken this many years for Ford to bring back the Bronco. Like, there is real world ramifications to making any reference in game. But if you don't do that, you're ignoring the fact that your game is taking up a huge portion of someone's life, and that person does still have awareness and things going on in their life outside of your game. And so it's weird that they're acting totally disconnected in that way.
That there's some people, the Blizzard they like is the Blizzard that's full of pop culture references and poop jokes and poop quests. I will definitely say that's never the Blizzard that I have liked creatively. I have liked I've liked Azeroth when it is a funky, fantasy setting, and I do like the odd little bit of, humor and edge, but not to the point where it yanks you out of the experience. These things, even from when I was a kid playing World of Warcraft, yanked me out of the experience a bit whenever I noticed them. So honestly, to me, even as a customer, hearing that World of Warcraft is probably going to have less references to the exterior world going forward, I would totally think that's a good thing. But versus most people, I have a far more hardline stance on that. Even in the likes of FF14, if I see like a quest that's a reference to a song,
oh, you're going to have a problem there.
Yeah, I know that, yeah, and I know that's a bit of a thing with me. But creatively, everything should be in universe in my mind, and that's just that. And then for all of the other aspects here, it's pretty obvious. You don't want memorials to these guys in the game if their actions don't represent the values of your company, the ideals of the worlds, and the stories that you're trying to make. Like, it just does make sense, even if it doesn't solve the problem.
But at that point, like, how do you choose who gets memorialized and who does not? Like, the Catholic Church has an entire process by which they decide if somebody's a saint, and they have to, like, dig through that person's life. These companies don't have that. And so, Donald Trump was in Home Alone. But there was nothing political about making that happen back then. Having him in a movie now reads as a very different statement. And it's a much more fractured statement where you're going to have people that like it and you're going to have people that don't. So, like, even as a memorial, even if you limit it only to death, what happens if somebody from that room had died in the last couple years and now that photo resurfaced? Do you still have to go back and do that? Even death does not stop you from people finding things out about that person later that they disagree with or don't like. So, like, and that's before you even reference, like, the consent side of it. Remember, Jesse McCree had to sign off on them using his name. So now somebody's estate makes that decision. And so there starts to be all these questions of, should we be making references to, and this is one of the things we're having now that they have the ability to go back and like remaster and CGI, bring an actor in from before. What happens if they want to bring an actor in that is dead at the time of filming and they have the technology to do that? Who signs for that? Is that something that we want to be involved in? So there's the ethical concerns don't stop by just saying, okay, let's only do it as a memorial status.
I think it's honestly simple, case closed. There need not be online drama and arguments here. I think everyone's right. Yeah, it really doesn't mean that much, but also you can see how it makes sense for leadership, and it just kind of is the correct move.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the point is, who does it really harm? The people who are harmed are people who will take time to get used to saying a different name for McCree, who maybe like the name for McCree but don't care about Blizzard internally or anything like that, which I imagine is a large swathe of people, but that's a very, very minor inconvenience for everyone aware of the situation to feel overly better. That's like, I guess.
Yeah, I don't play Overwatch and I don't spend time in, even if I was playing WoW right now, I wouldn't be spending time in McCree. So, like, the odds that I'm going to be impacted by that person's name, like, I'm literally not interacting with the content that is named after them.
So that's kind of the point. But there's like one little last thing I'd like to add, and I think it's mostly to provide a little bit of clarity on, like, Jesse McCree and what he may or may not have done. And this is mostly from the perspective of, it seemed because he was removed the same time as Bariga, and that Jesse was a very like a Blizzard veteran of like 15 years, I think, and then Bariga was the lead of the team.
Yeah,
I think it's possible that it could be a matter of something in the Diablo team that could have been misbehavior from them, but it also very well could have been those two were seen as leaders in the Diablo team, and that's why they were removed with investigations. So it's a kind of thing where it's
The cynic in me also notes that the Diablo team for the upcoming Diablo is not tied to incoming revenue. The cynic in me notes that the people getting pushed out are not people tied to direct revenue generating properties. That you don't see massive personnel changes inside World of Warcraft because World of Warcraft is still generating money. That's just the cynic in me. There's literally no evidence to back that up. But when I see a large publicly traded company said, we're going to get rid of anybody that's in the way of this, and then you see, Bobby Kotick probably still set to get an enormous paycheck next year. Like, when you see these things happen, and like the only real change is Jay Ellenbrack got to take a retirement package, and then some people working on projects that hadn't yet come out get let go. Real hard-hitting stuff there. And like, that's just the cynic in me. There's literally nothing to back that up. But I find that really coincidental that the only people getting pushed out are people that were either in a position that's not that bad of a gig, or they were people working on projects that we hadn't yet seen.
You can look at it and like the simple answer is obviously McCree was up to something no good, but given their policy of removing leaders who impeded or like stopped things from being fixed,
yeah,
it could be that as well. I mean, that's also, you were saying we don't know about Corey Stockton. The last thing we heard was, because they were fired 2 weeks ago, Corey Stockton was under investigation at that point. So I think he was...
Sorry, that slipped my mind. Yeah,
I think he was suspended pending investigation. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, so rough stuff.
Indeed.
I do imagine, like, legitimately that there are people who are let go just because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. That they say, hey, we're letting go of everybody that doesn't have a good reason to be in this photo. And so, like, that whole group, like, you just shouldn't have been there. But so they're gonna have to do some level of cleaning house. It's just the cynic in me that starts to say, oh, it's really impressive how no ongoing property right now is seeing massive changes. So it seems really, Overwatch 2 that had already been rumored to be delayed, and some had even rumored to have it canceled. And then Diablo, which has taken so long to come out that the year that people wanted it announced, there's a reason they didn't, because it wasn't that close. And that was the year that the phone comment came out of. That J. Allen Brack, who hasn't exactly been people's favorite anyway, and was given a chance to, like, kindly bow out, and I assume his severance package was quite generous. He's gonna be fine. Like, it doesn't feel like there was really anything that's hit Blizzard really, really hard long term at this point. It doesn't feel like from the outside that we've seen the big change yet. So them saying, like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to redo all this voice acting and animation. Oh no, like, that doesn't feel impactful. And maybe it is. Maybe inside it's a drastically different feeling company day over day. But from where I sit, I haven't yet seen enough action that says, like, if I thought it was worth quitting, which I did, I don't yet see enough that's worth unquitting. Like, I don't see a reason to return to the game yet, because everything that's happened doesn't feel like they gave up that much. Like, it's like, well, I threw out some stuff I hadn't used in a year, and I said I wasn't going to talk to somebody I already wasn't talking to, and I'm not going to eat that food of yours that I already don't like out of the fridge, and I'm going to pay the bills that I already agreed to pay on time. And it's like, okay, but so far you haven't said anything. Like, they're letting go of people that were in a photo that are working on projects that we can't see. And so by its very nature, we can't see how impactful those are, because they cannot be transparent about those projects. So even if those projects are drastically affected, they cannot show us the impact of that because of NDA. Logically. Like, I don't even blame them for that. But you can't expect me to be sympathetic over something I can't see. And then when you see projects like World of Warcraft coming out and saying, like, hey guys, we're going to start listening to our fans about stuff the fans have been saying since before Shadowlands even dropped. Do you want an award for this? So far, it doesn't feel like Blizzard has made a giant step. It does feel like they've at least, like, slowly turned to face the right direction, but I don't know what they're expecting from me as a player based on that little movement in the right direction.
You reap what you sow.
Yep.
Seems so. There we go.
Yeah. I think there's actually. I think I'll try to end this with one very vaguely, maybe not super positive, but kind of positive.
That'll be a welcome break.
Yeah, and it'll be something we'll cover on this channel next week. But it's EA actually had a statement, or it was Chris Bruzzo, their EVP of Positive Play, Marketing and Commercial, spoke to GameIndustry.biz, and one of the things they were talking about is how come it's Ubisoft and Activision Blizzard, but not EA, that have been embroiled in this. And apparently EA have just been ahead of the curve.
Yep.
And getting rid of people that were problems.
This is stuff that we've heard rumblings of for quite a while, actually. And they don't always have a great rap from players. Absolutely. And I mean, hey, EA have fucked up developers and franchises that I very much have liked. So I do get that. Totally. Like, they've really fucked up franchises I've liked. Goddamn, why'd you only give them, 10 minutes to make Mass Effect 3? And, kill Vicarious Visions and all those terrible things. And crunch has absolutely been an issue. And
no company this large is going to be able to handle everything nimbly and perfectly. And, while an indie studio makes mistakes, those mistakes are excusable. And then once they make those mistakes, you're like, well, what are you going to do? They made mistakes. We forgive them, and they don't get that much publicity outside of their immediately affected community, who already has a reason to trust them because they know about the good things too. They're not only hearing about the bad. When you talk about these bigger companies, when you talk about the launch of Avengers, that didn't make Square Enix look very good. When you talk about, so, like, handling properties well cannot be your standard by which you judge these large companies with AAA titles, because it is just a matter of time until they do something that makes you frustrated.
QA is still a hellscape no matter where you go, but it's decently known that they've taken these things seriously enough for a while.
So it's not all doom and gloom in the industry. It's mostly doom and gloom, but it's not all.
Yeah, we have the shining bastion of Electronic Arts. Haha!
Yeah, they gave us surprise loot mechanics, a phrase that we had never heard before that.
What an upside down world we're saying that.
Bit upside down. Yep. Yeah, so that's it for us. Thanks for tuning in. That is the most recent Blizzard Entertainment update.
It does show us a lot about why we should be careful about, like, the number of references. You know, Yoshi P is referenced in the Rising event each year, but those events don't repeat. So as soon as they end, they're gone. But the question is, like, how many references should there be to things? It does start to set that bar so that you can, because there are a number of gamers that think, you know, how could WoW have known not to name things after devs? There are a number of players that say, yeah, this sucks. Like, I understand why you guys don't like being in this position. That becomes less excusable the next time something like this happens. Whether it be Blizzard or not, if a photo comes out of another set of devs from another game, be it Final Fantasy XIV or Guild Wars or even a game outside of the MMO space, if a game comes out and it says, and here is a picture of of some of their core longtime devs doing something distasteful, all of a sudden we're gonna be like, well, did you not learn from the Blizzard thing? So, like, that's immediately going to be given less forgiveness by any gamer that was already exposed to this happening.